Could it be Macron to the rescue? The French president's top diplomatic advisor, Emmanuel Bonne, making his second trip to Tehran on the trot after the aborted airstrike by the U.S. off the Strait of Hormuz and the Iranians twice inching up nuclear enrichment above levels that exceed the 2015 nuclear deal. France's president has twice spoken with his Iranian counterpart on the phone, with the latest call Sunday night. Macron, who's also been on the blower to Donald Trump in the past 24 hours. Can France's president succeed where mediators from Dubai, Oman, and even Japan have so far failed? Is the timing right for Emmanuel Macron to make that long-delayed visit to Tehran they've been talking about since 2016? The Iranians have publicly singled out France for not doing more to stand up to Trump. We're going to be looking at the long and conflicted history between the two nations, dating all the way back to the days when Ayatollah Khomeini lived in exile here in France under the Shah, and ask if the time is right for all sides to de-escalate. Despite a steady diet of bellicose rhetoric on both sides, could Donald Trump's decision to abort those airstrikes last month prove a turning point for two sides haunted by precedents that prove that even human error can have grave consequences in that part of the region of the world? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Macron's Iran initiative. With us, General Dominique Trinquant, the former head of the French military mission to the United Nations. Thank you for joining us. Thanks as well from Washington to Michael Pregent, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute think tank.
Thanks for having me.
Joining us as well, journalist Negar Mortazavi, contributing editor to the Independent newspaper. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And from Stockholm, Rusbe Parsi, senior lecturer at Lund University. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, it's a two-day visit for Emmanuel Bonne, that diplomatic advisor. Specifics of the trip by the French president's top diplomatic advisor, unclear. We do know, though, that he's under a deadline. When Emmanuel Macron spoke on the phone with Hassan Rouhani Sunday, the presidential palace putting out a statement that included the following, that they're going to explore between now and July 15th the conditions for a resumption of dialogue between all parties. Are they under deadline, General Trinquant?
I mean, the deadline was fixed by the president.
What does that mean, July 15th?
Just following the 14th National Day in France. It means that the president decided that he has two weeks, in fact, to discuss. We know that there will be a meeting in Vienna this week on the nuclear arrangement and how far the Iranian have breached the agreement. And but it is this breach is not very important, meaning that the big breach could be if the Iranian decided that there will be no more scrutiny of the agreement inside Iran, no more expert coming and looking at the camera. So I think that the President Macron, is taking the room he's got to try to arrange an agreement which could be helpful for the Iranian, of course, but also helpful for the US and for President Trump, who, in my view, is in a bad position currently.
Rusbe Parsi, I want to get back again to that July 15th date that was put in that communique from the French presidential palace. Is that just a standard fare? You're trying to kickstart a negotiation, so you give yourself a deadline? Or is there stuff we don't know about back-channel negotiations right now?
Well, let's hope that there is back-channel negotiations. I think one of the things we have to remember here is that while Trump prefers to negotiate, if you want to call it that, very publicly through Twitter, he has absolutely no confidence or credibility in Iran. And therefore, for the Iranians, this has to be a very discreet affair. It cannot be done openly until they know what the end result is going to be. And it has to be something they can verify and trust. I think the deadline right now is as much about the fact that everyone needs to get in gear and start producing something, because the Iranians have a 60-day sequence of deadlines that they have put in place.
All right. You're saying Donald Trump does all his negotiating over Twitter. However, we did hear an exchange during a press conference he gave at the G20 summit in Osaka a little over 10 days ago. Donald Trump, unprompted, with a reporter's question, he brings up France. Here's the transcript of that. A lot of countries come up to me. France has come up. It's okay. Anybody can see them. I don't mind talking. I think talking is great. I'm not going to say, oh, don't talk to them. So visibly already at the time, Michael Pregent, there was something going on, and France was keeping the U.S. president in the loop.
Yeah, I think it's important to use the French position on the JCPOA, because I've heard some pretty strong language out of Paris, particularly with ballistic missiles, particularly with addressing Iran's regional behavior. So I think Macron's position on the Iran deal is actually shoring up the president's. We do need to make sure that any future deal that is put in place addresses behavior issues, addresses ballistic missiles, ends the sunset clause, the sunset clauses. And we have to remember, it was sanctions that brought Iran to the table under the Obama administration. And these sanctions alone, U.S. sanctions alone, are hurting Iran, and it will bring them back to the table, whether the president wins re-election or not. He's setting up a Democrat who, if they take office in 2021, to actually go at Iran from a position of strength and at least have France's support to get a deal that addresses all of these issues. The JCPOA was a weak deal. We're seeing that now. They were supposed to dismantle Iraq. They didn't. And now they're cheating with the Iran deal because they're cheating against Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and China. And each one of those countries is telling Iran, stay in the Iran deal, or stay in the JCPOA, don't leave it. So this is not the U.S. isolated. This is actually Iran being told by what it considers to be countries on its side that Iran needs to stay in the JCPOA and not breach the threshold for uranium enrichment, which they already have done.
Okay, but and by the way, Russia and China have also urged Iran to stay in the deal. They too are signatories.
Exactly.
Let me ask you, Michael Pregent, though, what do you make of that July 15th date that was put in that communique?
I think July 15th will come and go without any change in the Iranian position. We've heard language today that the regime will now exert a tax on transit through the Straits of Hormuz, a tax to protect oil tankers from being attacked by the IRGC Navy. That's how bad it is for this regime right now, where they're actually making these types of threats against the international community, that a tax will be levied on oil tankers transiting through the Straits of Hormuz to be protected from the IRGC Navy. That in itself is ridiculous, and I think that statements like that and the fact that the 15th is a week away, I think it will simply come and go.
Negar Mortazavi, do you agree?
I think France's, as far as we've been talking about President Macron, I think France's position to mediate is actually a good position. It's a strong position because of France's closeness as far as the criticism of the deal to the United States. In fact, I think the Iranians would rather have someone mediate who is closer to what President Trump thinks and what President Trump wants. But then at the same time, the success of any potential mediation depends on what there is to offer. Is President Trump willing to compromise? Is he willing to lift some of the sanctions, lift some of the pressure? And then the signals coming from Tehran seems that they are also ready to compromise and accept some sort of mediation. And this is actually a calculated move from Tehran using mechanisms within the deal. This is also important. They're pushing the limits of the deal incrementally. They're not completely abandoning it like President Trump did, but they're using this mechanism to put pressure, give a sense of urgency, but then at the same time, they're signaling that they're prepared to take the same path back and stay within the deal as long as they see compromise from the other side. And this may be actually the point of that breakthrough.
the point of that breakthrough, and do you agree with Michael that July 15th will come and go and we'll still be in the same place?
I'm not sure. I mean, one of these deadlines might be that deadline for the turning point. I don't think anything fundamentally different is going to happen within the next few weeks. But I think this could be the start of a de-escalation if President Trump is serious about negotiations, which he has been talking about for 2 years. It seems like Tehran is also signaling that they may be prepared for some sort of at least mediated solution to this and to start de-escalate. Because we have to remember, just last month, the two countries were almost at the brink of a war, a military conflict. President Trump was about to attack when he canceled. And it was a very, very serious, intense situation. So this could always go back to that point if it doesn't de-escalate.
We'll talk more about that. But just want to talk a little bit about some personnel reshuffle here in France, which might actually matter to all of this. There's a new ambassador in Washington. The old one retired. He is replaced at the United Nations in New York by a new ambassador there. Nicolas de Rivière is his name. He was France's longtime Iran nuclear deal negotiator, Dominique Trinquant. You, as somebody who's worked at UN headquarters in New York, how important could that building become?
I think it's very important on 2 points. The first thing is that Nicolas de Rivière has a very long history on the Iranian negotiation. He is now in New York at the Security Council, where many things will be discussed at this level. On the second point is that it is no longer the Quai d'Orsay, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who is discussing, is the president himself. It's the advisor, diplomatic advisor of the president who is going there, Emmanuel Bonne. So I think that now, because the challenges of major importance...
Yes, just to tell our viewers here, it's not just in the United States where the president bypasses the usual diplomatic channels when there's a big dossier.
Yeah, when there is a big dossier, it's the president who is in charge. And so he is a personal diplomatic advisor who is going there and talking directly to the president.
Is that good?
I think it's better. I think it's better because the President Macron is able to talk to the president in Iran and to talk to the president in the US. And so it's himself who is in charge of that. The Minister of Foreign Affairs is not in the same position. So this is very important. Just one thing I want to add is on the two sides, you've got the Iranian who are playing chess and you've got the US playing poker. And the problem is that President Trump already showed his card, meaning very high pressure, but no war. And the Iranians know that. And that's where President Macron, with his diplomatic advisor, have to negotiate between all these two positions.
How do you, if that's the case, and we saw Donald Trump call off potential airstrikes a couple of weeks back, how do you help Donald Trump save face if you're Emmanuel Macron?
Really, what is important for President Trump is the next elections. And if something happened during during the year, this will be a catastrophe for him. So I think President Macron have to help President Trump to come out from this corner. And because the Iranians are playing chess, they are going gradually. So they are not going very fast. So this leaves room to have an agreement between Mr. Trump and Mr. Rouhani.
Rouzbeh Parsi, 1976. That's the last time that a French president visited Iran. Could Emmanuel Macron be seen in Tehran sometime soon?
Well, I mean, there has been attempts of arranging that, but I think the French position on the JCPOA and Macron's attempt to kind of assuage Trump last year in order not to leave the agreement by bringing in extraneous issues such as ballistic missiles and so on did not go down well in Tehran. So I think at this point that looks a bit far-fetched. But again, it depends on what this diplomatic shuttling back and forth will will result in. But I just want to add one thing to what Michael Pridgen said about the nuclear agreement. Iran is not in breach of the agreement in a material sense, except for what they've done now in the last couple of days, which will have no effect whatsoever on Iran's ability or capacity to create a nuclear weapon. But more importantly, when it comes to the Iraq heavy water plant, it's a case in point in how the Trump administration has created this crisis all by itself. It's the United States that's supposed to give waivers to companies from Europe and China to transform that heavy water plant and reactor into something that does not produce anything that is useful for a nuclear weapon. And it's the Trump administration itself that has gone back and forth on whether it wants to issue those waivers and now shortening the time period for those waivers that makes it difficult, if not impossible, to achieve that non-proliferation goal. So it's the United States that is basically stopping other countries from helping Iran adhere to non-proliferation. And that creates a crisis which then the US claims that it needs to solve in various ways. Totally self-inflicted wound.
All right, I want to get Michael Pridgen's reaction, but we have to go to a quick,
definitely.
we have to go to a quick break. Alas,
Okay.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we've seen the spike in tension the last weeks between the U.S. and Iran surrounding the nuclear deal and the U.S. decision first to walk away, and now Iran's decision to gradually inch away from its commitments. We're talking about it with General Dominique Trinquant, former head of the French military mission to the United Nations. From Washington, Michael Pridgen, who is senior fellow at the Hudson Institute think tank, joining us joining us as well as Negar Mortazavi, contributing editor to the Independent newspaper in the UK, and from Stockholm, Rusbeh Parsi, senior lecturer at Lund University. Welcome back to all of you. We were talking about the French mediation efforts, what with their the French president's top diplomatic advisor currently in Tehran, and with the Iranian economy in free fall, Tehran demanding that the other parties to the deal, especially France, Germany, and Britain, deliver the promised economic benefits that were promised back in 2015 and help Iran bypass those U.S. sanctions.
If the remaining countries in the deal, especially the Europeans, do not fulfill their commitments seriously and do not do anything more than talk, Iran's third step will be harder, more steadfast, and somehow more stunning.
Michael Pridgen, your reaction to the fact that the Iranians are, well, we could say it, leaning on the Europeans?
Well, you'd hope the Europeans would push back and not be intimidated by this, and I think that's what we're seeing. The Iranians are making these threats to not only increase their enrichment capacity, but also to, again, exert that toll on transit through the Straits of Hormuz. I just want to say a couple things. Macron is a decision maker. Trump is a decision maker in this process. Rouhani's a messenger. Rouhani's not a decision maker. The supreme leader will decide. Okay, the supreme leader lost faith in Zarif, lost faith in Rouhani because the United States walked away from the Iran deal. And now we're having Rouhani and Zarif continue to champion this failed deal. And I would tell Mr. Parsi, hey, listen, you don't have to convince me that Iran's not cheating. You need to convince Germany, Britain, France, Russia, and China. All countries say that Iran is in violation of the JCPOA right now. They've always been in violation of Section 1 Annex T, always in violation of Section 1 Annex Q. So they've always been in violation of something. They've even violated the NPT twice, the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty twice. And another thing, as far as this non-attack 2 weeks ago, it actually gave the president leverage. The president was able to take intelligence to the UN Security Council to show that it was the IRGC Navy responsible for those oil tanker attacks in the Straits of Hormuz. It was also an opportunity to show the international community that the American Global Hawk UAV was shot down in international waters. Let's talk about what happened 2 weeks ago. The United States demonstrated a capability. Iranian radar picked up the American attack that was coming. It lit up all of their radars, and then we put an offensive cyber attack on them and shut them all down. It's the equivalent of filming somebody sleeping and saying, I could have killed you last night. And that's what the president said when he said, listen, I saved about 150 IRGC lives last night by not conducting the attack. The president has leverage. If you look at the Islamic Republic's actions since that non-attack 2 weeks ago, they've been minimal with the exception of the Houthis. But we also now know that Iran has opened up a second front in Iraq with an Iraqi militia launching armed UAVs at Saudi Arabia. So the United States can hit the IRGC Quds Force proxies, the IRGC Navy, and these military sites without going to war. And the Iranian diaspora that I've been speaking with, that have been speaking to people in D.C., do not believe attacking the IRGC Navy or IRGC proxies or any of these nuclear sites will be a rally behind the flag moment in Iran. This regime is unpopular. It was failing when we were in the JCPOA. It was mismanaging its economy. And Mr. Parsi, ballistic missiles are not superfluous. They are the delivery system for a nuclear warhead. And in Kamala Harris's second term, within this current JCPOA structure, Iran would be able to put a nuclear warhead on a ballistic missile and be in compliance with the JCPOA. That's how bad this Iran deal was.
Negar Mortazavi, your thoughts on at this point in time what that spike in tension we saw 2 weeks ago actually means?
Well, I think there's a little bit of a contradiction here because at the same time, the Trump administration or the policy is claiming that the pressure has worked on Iran. But at the same time, it seems like Iran's regional behavior hasn't really changed. In fact, it has intensified, which was the focus of the pressure campaign. I don't think this was a very good strategy on the part of President Trump. He seems to have been using the same strategy he used with North Korea, and that worked to some extent because the North Korean leader operates very differently from the Iranian leadership. He wanted that photo up with President Trump as much, if not more, than President Trump. He wanted that legitimacy of standing next to President Trump, of bringing him to the DMZ zone and all of that. The Iranian leadership is not looking for any of that. The Iranian top leadership, the supreme leader, even the president, none of them are looking to be in a photo with President Trump or to get that kind of legitimacy for their domestic purposes. So the maximum pressure and the confrontation and the tough rhetoric on Iran is very different from what the previous administration, President Obama's administration, used on Iran, because they used the pressure, but at the same time, they provided incentives. President Obama ensured that Iran can continue enrichment, can continue a civil nuclear program, and that he's not looking for regime change in Iran. President Trump has said some of that in rhetoric, but it hasn't really been matched with action. His action has just been pressure, piling up of sanctions, and not much of the incentive. But then at the same time, I want to add this point that he is an isolationist. He's not looking for a war. He didn't run on a campaign promise of more wars. In fact, he criticized Democrats and Republicans for waging all these Middle Eastern wars. And it seems like he is actually trying so hard to not start another war in the Middle East. But at the same time, like your guest in the studio said, he is playing in a way that he's gone to the brink of it, but he's showed Iran, at least until now, that he's not willing to stage a war. And I think, again, as I said, this could be the point of that breakthrough if he's really looking for that negotiation and for that new deal, which I believe he is. I think it's time to compromise and to try, start to de-escalate. And I think Tehran is also prepared to do some form of compromise with Washington as well.
There could be a sign of that de-escalation. Before I turn to the rest of the panel, let me ask you about this, General Trinquant. Last month, those incidents with the tanker sabotaged off of Oman, that U.S. surveillance drone shot down that Michael Pregent was talking about, depending on who you believe, was either inside or outside of Iranian territorial waters. And you see, when you look at the map, it just tells the story right there of just how important that tiny stretch of waterway is for the entire planet. 1/3, I think, of all the seaborne crude oil goes through there. Do you agree with Michael when he says that actually it was a show of strength on the part of Trump to say, look, I could have hit you, but I didn't?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that. I think the contrary. I think that first, the referee in the JCPOA is not Washington. The referee is Vienna. And Vienna has always said that the
International Atomic Energy Agency.
So, and nobody trusts what Washington is saying. Why? Because remember, it was exactly the same game in 2003 on the Iraqi crisis. The American was showing many things, and it was nobody believed that. So now there is a discussion. I'm not saying that it is wrong, but there is a discussion. Nobody can trust what the proof put on the table by the U.S. because of what they done in 2003. And remember, some of the people were in the driving seats at that time. I'm talking about Bolton, for example, are still there. So there is a discussion on that. And so that's why I think we should trust the referee, which is Vienna, and let people be discussion in between the two people, because nobody can trust U.S., neither probably trust Iran.
And do you agree with Negar that both sides are ready now for a de-escalation?
They've got to de-escalate. But the problem is how to take them out from the corner they are. On the Iranian side, because of course there is the discussion, it's quite right. It's not the president who is in charge. The leader is not the president. And so
it's not President Rouhani. It's Ayatollah Khamenei.
Exactly, and is in the end of the people, the Pasdaran, who are very strong, and they want probably to have not a fight, but to have a very difficult situation, because they can control a very difficult situation. So this is where we've got a problem. On one side, Trump, it was right saying that Trump is a decision maker, but on the Iranian side, we don't know who is speaking to the decision maker.
Let me ask you just, Michael Pregent, there was the talk of sanctions on Iran's foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif. Those sanctions haven't happened yet. Do you see that as a sign that, well, perhaps there is some kind of de-escalation in the works?
Yeah, I don't know if sanctioning the foreign minister would have been a good idea, because that would literally put everything here in the United States at risk of U.S. secondary sanctions, because it is the foreign minister that engages with U.S. senators. It is the foreign minister that can come here to talk. So I think keeping that line of communication is open. I mean, the Oman channel is a very strong channel, a back channel to the supreme leader. Hopefully France has the same back channel. Again, Rouhani's not a decision maker, he's a messenger. And people are right to be skeptical about what the United States is doing based on the Iraq war. I get that, but this is so different. Nobody's disputing that Iran is going towards a nuclear program, or we wouldn't have a JCPOA. No one is disputing that Iran is aggressive in the region, because we see those actions. So I think there are hard facts that the Islamic regime is very different than what we said Saddam was in 2003. So the arguments don't hold up. They're nice talking points, but when you actually look at facts, Iran actually was trying to develop a nuclear weapon, and we have evidence of that, because they will actually tell you that's what they're doing. And they're making those threats now that they will push towards that if Europe doesn't bend, if Europe doesn't find a back channel to bypass U.S. secondary sanctions. The European governments have told their private sector to invest in Iran, and the private sector knows all too well that U.S. Treasury will impose sanctions on those companies, and it's not worth the risk to their board. The private sector has no interest in investing in a shrinking economy that's being mismanaged by the regime, and it was being mismanaged when the Obama administration held the regime in favor. Remember, it was this regime, while China was pouring billions of dollars into Iran, and the Obama administration with Secretary Kerry was urging European investment, that continued to mismanage the economy to the point where the price of an egg is the equivalent of $6 on a $6,000 annual budget. That's how bad this regime is at managing an economy when the United States was still in the JCPOA. So I think all leverage is on the U.S. side and should be on the international community side to deal with an actor in the region that, again, is threatening to shut down the Straits of Hormuz if Europe doesn't bend, if Europe doesn't cave. And I hope that this engagement in Tehran, this July 15th date, we come at this from a position of strength. Iran has upped its uranium enrichment only so they can go back to the JCPOA levels. That's not a negotiation. That's where we were before. We need to address ballistic missiles because, again, it's the delivery system for a nuclear weapon. We need to address regional behavior because the JCPOA actually empowered and emboldened this regional behavior. It shored up Assad. It built new militias in Iraq and Yemen. It provided new capability.
Yeah, Ruzbeh Parsi.
Absolutely. Oh, no, I didn't know it was Parsi. No,
well, look,
absolutely not.
First of all, it makes no sense whatsoever to be. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever that staying inside the JCPOA would somehow get Iran to a nuclear weapon. That doesn't make any logical sense whatsoever. Now, when it comes to any potential negotiations
so that's ridiculous. That's another talking point.
Today,
that's a talking point.
Iran that has
it absolutely does. It's a talking point.
No,
that's why
it's
it's called a sunset clause.
No. I mean,
it's a sunset clause. Define sunset clause.
Somehow the Hudson Institute, a couple of neocons in D.C. are the only ones who have read the deal. And no one else.
Be factual, Parsi. Be factual.
Now, if we can just get back
one at a time, Ruzbeh Parsi.
Now, if we can get back to the idea of negotiations. So, the point here is that the Iranians have made steps that exceed the JCPOA, but have said, and these steps are totally reversible. That is, Iran can immediately go back to adhering fully to the JCPOA. That gives them some leverage, but more importantly,
negotiation. That's going back to where they were before.
The problem for the Trump administration, if I could just finish a point. Now, the difference is that the Trump administration has a credibility issue. It has a national security advisor, John Bolton, that has gone on the record saying that he wants to overthrow the Islamic Republic. And the president himself hasn't been very clear exactly what it is that he wants from these negotiations, except that it has to be a better deal. The question is, what does a better deal mean? So the Trump administration at this point is lacking the specificities of what it is that it wants from Iran, and more importantly, what it is willing to give Iran. Because we have to remember that up until a couple of days ago, Iran was totally adhering to the deal with the full support of all the other signatories. And if this had been a material breach, the communique from the E3 and the others would have been much more harshly worded than it is. They understand that at this point, this is a negotiation tactic. The Iranians are not in material breach. There is no dash for a nuclear weapon. There is still time to save the deal. But for that to happen, the Americans have to come up with something that looks like a realistic bid for the negotiations, rather than outlandish claims of everything Iran has to give up, believing that Iran is so desperate that it would do so. Now, we can discuss whether Iran is strong or weak all day long. The point is that in Tehran, they do not believe themselves to be so weak as to basically just fall flat in front of Donald Trump.
All right. There's another new element that's just come in, which is that oil tanker seized last week off Gibraltar by the British, the Panamanian flagship carrying crude, which according to U.S. intelligence was bound for Syria in violation of an EU embargo. Iran denies. And while we've heard menacing words from Iran against the UK, the British have a fan in Washington, D.C.
We welcome the action by the British Royal Marines on the 4th of July, no less, to enforce EU sanctions on Syria by seizing a supertanker with millions of barrels of Iranian oil off Gibraltar. That is a real 4th of July present.
Negar Mortazavi, he was speaking at something called the Christians United for Israel conference in Washington. Your thoughts on how much weight John Bolton's words have with the U.S. president right now?
Well, it doesn't seem like John Bolton's word has as much weight as everybody expected because, as it was discussed, he's been on the record saying that the U.S. should bomb Iran, that there should be a regime change in Iran. He's even suggested the alternative for a different regime, the MEK, the Iranian opposition group that he's been aligned with up until joining the administration. And most of that seems to be very different as far as what's coming from President Trump, the signals coming from President Trump. He's clearly said on the record that he doesn't want regime change in Iran. He went into the brink of an attack, but he didn't. And it seems like he wants a new deal with the current leadership, as he said. I just think that the strategy that President Trump is taking to eventually get to that new deal is being designed by people like John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, who want different things, who want a different end goal. And that's I think, the dilemma that President Trump is stuck with. He's taking the wrong path to a different destination. But at the same time, I want to point this out, that President Trump, this could be a window of opportunity, a very unique window of opportunity, because on the Iranian side, as it was discussed, it's the supreme leader who makes the final decision. So the Iranian hardliners or moderates, doesn't matter who negotiates, they need to have the word from the supreme leader. On this side, when it's the Democrats, you always have the Republicans against them. But President Trump is a Republican. He's a unique isolationist Republican who wants to cut a deal with Iran. And if he does that, the Democrats are not going to be against it. So if this eventually goes through and a deal, whatever deal he's been wanting and talking about, if there's some form of compromise with Iran and a deal is made, this is going to be unique as far as both hardliners, I would say, on both sides, basically negotiating and coming to some form of an agreement.
And what kind of a deal are you talking about? Is it go just beyond going back to the 2015 nuclear deal?
Well, President Trump has basically created a crisis or a self-fulfilling prophecy because he has unraveled a deal that was supposed to keep Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. And now he says he doesn't want Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon without having anything to replace that deal. So we've been dealing with this one-year situation of President Trump. President Trump left the deal against the advice of his own top advisors. We're talking about Rex Tillerson, we're talking about Jim Mattis, we're talking about General McMaster and others. So anyways, he did exit the deal. There's no alternative so far. And what everyone has been telling him, including European allies, was that find something to replace it before you unravel it, or build on it, because this deal provides a mechanism, all these diplomatic channels that President Trump could have just built on to come up with amendments or basically other areas that he wanted to discuss. But he unraveled it, and it seems like
Iran said no to that.
He wanted.
Macron tried to introduce ballistic missiles to the Iran deal, and Iran said no. That's why Macron visited D.C. He said Macron wanted the regime to address ballistic missiles, and the regime said no.
A deal or a negotiation is give and take. You take something, you give something. At least that's how the other sides are seeing it. So if President Trump is prepared to make more compromise, to meet Tehran somewhere halfway, I think this might be, like I said, the breaking point that the Iranians would also be willing to negotiate more. But again, as Ruzbeh said, there's a lack of credibility in Tehran from their perspective on President Trump, and that's why some of this has to be done either through mediators or in back channels, and it's not going to be the way that it's been done with North Korea, or also the way that John Bolton has been envisioning, I think.
Michael Prechin, do you agree that there is a unique window of opportunity right now, considering the current domestic political climate in the United States?
Well, I think regardless of who wins the presidency, the president has set up Kamala Harris for success if she wins. She can come back into the Iran deal from a position of strength and negotiate ballistic missiles. And all of us sitting around the table know that that's what the deal breaker was when Macron visited Washington, D.C. prior to the president walking away from the JCPOA. It was about Iran's ballistic missile program and its regional behavior. The regime said no. The regime wasn't willing to budge on that, so the United States walked away. The United States, if you look at the 12 points that Pompeo has laid out, they're tough. If Iran adheres to any of them, pick 2, pick 3, pick 1, the regime will collapse. The regime cannot sustain itself without exporting terrorism. The regime cannot sustain itself without its ballistic missile program. The regime cannot sustain itself without its nuclear program. So I agree. The plan is regime change without saying it, and it's those 12 steps. If Iran adheres to any combination of those 12 steps, it is regime collapse.
That's
if you listen
Pompeo's
to what,
plan. I don't think that's President Trump's plan.
Let me bring
That's
in
Mike Pompeo's
let me
plan.
bring in General.
Trump's a transactional leader. Trump is a transactional
Let me bring in
leader.
General Trinquant
He's
because
gonna pick-
we're running short on time.
He's going to pick a couple of those and then make a deal.
I think we must keep in mind what are the aim of the Iranian leader and the U.S. leader. The Iranian leader wants their regime to survive. President Trump wants to be elected. And if they feel that they are in danger on both of these points, this is where there is a room for negotiation. And this is where President Macron can work on that, because they both of leaders will think that they are in danger.
Because it's not an election year here in France.
Yeah.
Rouzbeh Parsi, final word, very briefly.
Well, let's just hope that all of this back-channeling leads to something, at least for a de-escalation for the moment. But then the question is, what is the long-lasting solution to all of this? And there, I think the American side need to kind of reconsider what they consider to be their position of strength vis-a-vis the Iranians.
All right, Negar Mortazavi, at this point in time, there is an economy in Iran which is suffering badly. No negotiations. Surely you were saying earlier that Iranians think they can tough it out. Can they?
Well, we still have to wait and see in the next few weeks, but I think the strategic thinking in Tehran is more and more leaning towards this understanding or this conclusion that they need to resolve their issues with the United States. They cannot continue. They've been waiting for a year for Europe to basically defy U.S. sanctions, and they see that Europe wasn't really able to live up to the promise. And I think Tehran is coming to this conclusion that they need to resolve it, but at the same time, there's this credibility issue that President Trump needs to work on, and this compromise of taking something when you offer something and meeting them halfway, basically.
And we'll leave it there for now. Negar Mortazavi, I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank Rouzbeh Parsi in Uppsala, Sweden, Michael Pregent in Washington, General Dominique Trinquant. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.